Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. I'm back today to talk about some of the books that I would like to read in the spring months. Now, this is coming a little bit later than I would normally do it. I'd usually do it at the beginning of a season. But considering that I use March for History-a-thon, it seemed a little bit more sense-making to push this off later. And when I'm talking about the spring books I want to read, I'm specifically talking about April and May reads, since it's pretty much guaranteed that my March reading is taken up by women's history. As much as I do love History-a-thon, the placement of it being in March is a little bit unfortunate considering there are so many book prices that always get BookTube all aflutter. In the past few weeks we've had the announcements for the Women's Prize for Fiction and Non-Fiction, their two respective long lists, the Walter Scott Prize, the Booker International, as well as various others. I've not really been a big prize list reader over the past couple of years, but the lists that I've seen so far this year look really intriguing. And while I am not a completionist for any of these lists, I would like to pick and choose the ones that do appeal to me. The first of those being The Eagle in the Heart by Helen Castor. This is the non-fiction history on the Women's Prize, which is looking at the intertwined lives of Richard II and Henry IV. This is especially intriguing to me considering I just finished John Jones' Henry V, his biography looking at the son of Henry IV. At the beginning of the biography we actually get a little bit more context and information about the relationship between Richard II and Henry IV, the conflicts between them that would lead to Henry IV usurping Richard, but also what the future Henry V's relationship was like to the king that his father usurped. And so yeah, out of all of the long lists that I've seen so far, this is the book that I am most intrigued by. The second of those being Embers of the Hands by Eleanor Barraclough. This is also on the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, is also a history, but this time we are looking at untold Viking histories. I've said in the past I am not really a big Viking girl, which seems treasonous to say considering I am a University of York graduate, but the Vikings had just never appealed to me. But I acknowledge that's just for lack of knowledge rather than anything not being interesting about them themselves. And so I am very much willing for this book to turn me on a new interest. The book from the Walter Scott Prize that I am the most intrigued by, since I've already read Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lenin, is Mother Naked by Glenn James Brown. I don't know very much about this aside from the fact that it is told by a wandering minstrel, set in the city of Durham in the early 15th century. All I know about this is that it's a very unique voice, which I think, having just read Glorious Exploits and A Little Trickery, I'm very much up for historical fiction with a little bit of a twist. And then the last two books from the prize lists that I'm most intrigued by are both from the Women's Prize for Fiction. The first of those being Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. This I believe is contemporary fiction, but we're looking at a woman escaping with her two children from an abusive husband and the ramifications of that decision. I really know nothing more than that aside from the fact that so many people have said it's brilliant, and for some reason I am just going on blind faith with that. I'm also oddly quite intrigued by The Dream Hotel by Leila Lamani, which just came out in March. This is kind of a speculative science fiction-y book in which people's dreams are monitored, and we're following our main character who has dreamt about killing her husband, and so the authorities take her away with the assumption that if she's dreamt it, she almost certainly wants to do it, keeping her under observation for 3 weeks to get down to her true intentions, all the while she's trying to get out and get back home to her family. This kind of speculative fiction is not something that I tend to read a whole lot of. I think I read a lot more prior to starting my BookTube channel, but since it's on the Women's Prize, might give me an extra boost to pick it up. And then the last few books that I am going to put onto my spring TBR come from my own to be read pile. And because I feel like as a mark of shame I'm going to have to include this on each seasonal list until I end up reading it, we do have in fact Hera by Jennifer Saint. This has maybe been on 3 or 4 of these season TBRs. And basically I need to get this read before the paperback comes out because otherwise it's just ridiculous that I've bought it. So here we have Jennifer Saint doing her typical Greek myth retelling, but this time from the perspective of the Queen of the Gods, Hera. And yeah, I don't know what else I can say that I haven't already said about this. I'm just very intrigued to get her perspective. Next up is a non-fiction history, The Bookshop, the Draper, the Candlestick Maker by Annie Gray, a history of the high street. I previously got this out of the library and I didn't get very far in it, but then when I saw it in the Waterstones half price sale I thought, you know, I do want to finish this off, so I did in fact pick it up. I've really liked Annie Gray's writing in the past. She's known as a food historian, so I'm really intrigued to her interest in this topic of the British high street and the history of it. I think this goes from the 1500s on to the present day, and the way that our high street is just constantly declining with the rise of the internet and internet shopping. I would also like to take a crack at reading more of the books that were recommended by other booktubers in their best of 2023 2024 videos. I have a video down below where I summarise all of the books which I saw on those videos I was most intrigued by. And upon seeing that this book had finally come out into paperback, I decided at long last I will pick up James by Percival Everett. Here's a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but from the perspective of Jim, or James as he is named here, adding a new perspective to this story. Of course, I'm coming to this book from the perspective of somebody who's never read Huckleberry Finn, but I have been reliably informed that I don't necessarily need to know that story in order to enjoy this. We know I always have to have a little bit of romance, and one that is on my physical TBR is Bad Publicity by Bianca Gillen, a contemporary romance featuring a book publicist and an author. And as somebody who works in book publicity myself, I am just very intrigued by what she gets right and what she gets wrong about this profession. But yes, the premise of this is that we are following a book publicist who gets a new job and finds out that one of the authors that she has to work with is an ex of hers. She's already feeling all shades of awkward about that, but he's got a new book coming out to which there is going to be a European tour. They are having to spend a month going to all of the most romantic countries in the world, despite the fact that they hate each other. Of course, we know what's going to happen next. And then the final book on my TBR, which is actually one that I'm reading right now. Don't tell anybody I'm reading a non-Herstory-a-thon book during Herstory-a-thon, but it's a new book in a series and I just had to. It is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the next of the Hunger Games prequels in which we are looking at the games of Haymitch Abernathy, who we know as the District 12 mentor for Katniss and Peter in the original series. We are getting to see the 50th Hunger Games, the second quarter quell, which sees 16-year-old Haymitch thrown into the games and having to fight to survive. It got published yesterday, I picked up my copy and I have immediately just dove straight in. It's amazing how much the teenage version of me just took hold. I was like, no, you must read this now. But so far, I'm really quite enjoying it. And I felt like I had to include this in my TBR, since one of the very first videos that I ever did on this channel was a reading vlog going through the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Weirdly, the Hunger Games does have a little bit of lore on this channel, and I always very much enjoy myself with this series. I mean, is enjoyed the right word? Probably not. But this series always gives me a lot to think about, and every year that goes by, somehow the capital becomes more and more relevant to our lives. So yeah, definitely a lot of food for thought there. So there we go, those are all of the books that I'm very much looking forward to reading in the spring months. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the highlights that I'm hoping to get to sometime soon. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Alternatively, please let me know about anything that is on your spring TBR. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.